Hello gang, Tattoo Biker here with you. And tonight I've got two chilling stories submitted by viewers that will send shivers down your spine. The first story takes us to a Minnesota ski resort, where a bizarre and terrifying event leaves one viewer forever haunted by the experience. And in the second story, we're riding back in time to 1957 North Carolina, where a young girl and her family experienced something truly bizarre. So get your gear squared away and let's ride. Number 1. Dear Biker, I have an experience that I just can't explain, and I'd really like to share it with you, and maybe your listeners. You see, back in 1975, a ski resort opened about an hour from the Twin Cities next to the St. Croix River. It wasn't huge, and it sat in a sparsely populated area outside of Minnesota. It was new, and it was in an age where there were no cell phones or iPods. All the kids in school wanted to go there. I joined our school ski club, and we went every Thursday. Often enough that I got to know the owner and would talk to him about skiing and sometimes even ski with him. In 1977, I graduated, and I joined the Navy and went away. Whenever I got leave and came home, it was wintertime, I would go to the resort and ski. Each time, I would renew my friendship with the owner and then join him on the trails, and we would ski until closing time. Well, one winter, I came home and, as usual, decided to go to the resort. This was a Wednesday, and my sister, niece, and one of her friends had asked to come with me, so we made a night of it. When we arrived at the resort, I found myself behind the rental counter. We talked for a while and then made my way to the slopes. The owner was off the skis because of a neck injury, so I was skiing alone. It was an off night with hardly anyone at the resort. There were no schools or classes scheduled for that night. It was about 10 degrees with light snow and a slight wind. I thought that I would get bored with the skiing, but it was fun and time passed quickly. It was the last trip down before I knew it, and what I thought was the end of a good day. I returned to the chalet and searched for everyone who needed a ride home with me, but they were all missing. I eventually found my sister in the bar and asked her if she had seen our niece and her friend. She said that she saw them once, standing next to a cross-country trail entrance on a run called Moonshine. Well, this was bad. If they had gone down that run, the girls would be somewhere in the dark woods surrounding the mountain. I hurried over to the front desk, my sister in tow, and told the owner I had to go back up the mountain. My sister asked me to wait for her, but I was impatient and skied to the chairlift before she ever got out of the lodge. Now, the mountain didn't seem so fun. It was a cold, barren place with a touch of danger. The resort that seemed so familiar to me was changing unpleasantly. The lift operators had been warned of my coming and were ready to let me on. They may not have known my name, but we had talked casually through the night each time that I used the lift. They, too, seemed worried. They let me know that the ski patrol would be beginning their last check of the runs in a few minutes. As I let the chair catch me behind the legs and lift me into the air, I waved to them and held onto the chair for support. There were no people ahead of me in the chairs, and I never saw my sister reach the lift before I got too far away to see the base of the hill and the falling snow. A movie about a Bigfoot attacking a ski resort called Snow Beast was playing in my mind when I rode up the trails. A stupid movie, so fake it shouldn't have bothered me, but I rose up the mountain and I grew frightened, half expecting a Bigfoot to just reach up out of the woods and snatch me off the lift. The bald top of the mountain came into view, and by the time I skied off the lift at the top, I was both worried and paranoid. I felt like I was being watched, and that to fall or make noise might be a fatal mistake. I pulled across the top of the mountain to the entrance of the trail Moonshine. I was completely alone. I looked into the dark entrance of the trail and saw a reflection. a light from further down past a corner. Making as little noise as possible, I skied to the first corner and followed the turn, taking care not to fall. The next corner had a single light on a pole, casting dark shadows at the entrance to the two trails that I'd come to check. One of the trails was 3 miles long and the other was 5 miles long. With the fresh snow, I thought if anyone had taken these trails, I could see their tracks and alert the ski patrol to where they might possibly be lost in the woods. To say I was frightened would be a massive understatement. I was terrified, yet I had no reason to feel like I was being watched or threatened. I had experienced danger in the service, but this was nothing like that. This was completely visceral. I came to a stop at the lone light and looked at the dark trail entrance. The one to the west had no tracks leading to it. I pulled over to the next entrance and looked down at the snow. 2 sets of tracks crossed the manila rope used to block the entrance of the 5-mile-long trail. The tracks were covered with about a 1/4 inch of fresh snow. Whoever had made these had crossed the rope within the last hour or two. I stared off into the darkness and I tried to decide what I had to do, but deep down, I already knew the answer. I had to go after them. Even if they chose not to go down the cross-country trail, the only way off that trail once you passed the ropes was an expert run. That was a chute dropping rapidly to rejoin moonshine about 200 yards from where I stood. The name of that short trail was the Devil's Run. I looked back at the trail hoping for a ski patrol person to wave down, but unfortunately, I was alone. I started to enter the run, but just couldn't seem to cross the rope. I know it was fear that was stopping me, but I had no obvious reason to fear. I was an expert skier. I knew the trails. So, gritting my teeth, I worked my way onto the trail, but couldn't get myself to go into the dark. I turned away and felt shame as the fear grew more intense and made me stop there in my tracks. Looking around once more, I confirmed that I was indeed still alone. Then, almost as if a casual act, I twisted and then shouted my niece's name off into the darkness. Immediately, 2 children's voices came from the woods. They were screaming in terror, and one of them shouting that it was killing them. As the screaming continued, I stood there in shock, unable to breathe or move. As quickly as they had come, the scream stopped, but I thought I could hear whimpering just over the sound of the trees rustling in the wind. I must have shouted incoherently and moved before my mind began to fully function. Before I knew it, I realized I was turning and facing the woods. Pointing forward before my mind once again screamed for me to stop. There was something wrong with this situation, but I was at a loss for understanding any of it. I just knew that I was going into the dark and I would be alone to face whatever was happening to those poor children. Regretfully, forlornly, I looked back up the trail and, with relief, saw a ski patrol coming my way. That's when the whimpering stopped. When he came to a stop next to me, I rapidly told him what was happening. But he had this odd look on his face. It seemed like he thought that I was lying to him, so I told him I was going down the trail. Anger had defeated the fear that held me there. Before I could go, he stopped me and entered the trail, telling me that he would meet at the exit a few hundred yards away. I turned and started to ski, but within seconds, the man went out of the trail exit without stopping. I worked hard to catch up to him, and finally caught him at the base of the mountain near the chairlift. I grabbed his arm and stopped the ski patrol, demanding to know what had happened. He said nothing was in the woods, just go home. We argued there for a few minutes, me saying there were children up there. He told me to just go home. Finally, I pulled up to the chairlift to get on for a ride back up the mountain. The ski patrol yelled at the lift operator to shut it down. The argument got worse, and there was almost a fight when I saw my sister coming down the moonshine with another member of the ski patrol. I spoke to her, but before I could say anything, she said that they had heard children crying. The ski patrol with her had made my sister come down the mountain without entering the woods. The argument continued at the chairlift for a few more minutes before I realized I could get my friend to let me back up the mountain. I hurried to the lodge where my niece and her friend were waiting. I charged in to find the owner, and he was at the front desk. I quickly told him what had happened. My sister joined me as I spoke, confirming the screams of the children. His reaction as I talked was odd, as if maybe he had heard this before. When I asked to be let back up the hill, he told me no, and it was not something to concern myself over, and to think of it just as ghosts. By now, most of the members of the ski patrol were standing there behind us. I suspected that they were there to keep me from going back up that hill when they moved in front of the door. We all took our ski boots off, and our sister, niece, and her friend to the car. I didn't look back to see if anyone was watching us depart. I was quiet. None of this made any sense. My favorite place to ski was now tainted, and I was determined to come back and look down that trail. The drive to Stacy, Minnesota, where I dropped my niece off, was completely silent. My sister and I had nothing to say, and my niece thought we were mad at her. I did have enough voice to tell her that something had happened, but I didn't want to talk about it. Once they were out of the car, I took the back road to Wyoming. I headed home down a road with a few houses. A mile out of Wyoming, I began to feel the fear again. Only this time it was much, much worse. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw nothing. No lights of the farm that we had just passed, just an impenetrable darkness. The side view mirrors were the same. As the fear grew, my foot lightened on the accelerator and the car slowed. I could feel the hair on my head pushing against my hat. I realized that tears were flowing down my cheeks. I looked at my sister, and I realized then that she was crying too. When I looked to the rearview mirror again, without knowing why I did it, I knocked the mirror askew with my right hand. I asked her to look behind the car and tell me what she saw. Slowly, she turned and then gasped, then spun forward and sunk down in her seat. She managed to tell me to just keep driving. The car had slowed to 10 miles an hour, and I sped up and tried my best to drive under these circumstances. After about a half mile, we passed a farmhouse, and the feeling went away, as if a person had just switched off a light. We drove the rest of the way home without incident. I asked her what she saw, and my sister said that she saw death behind us and refused to ever talk about it again. A few days later, I returned to the ship, and a few years later, I was involved in an explosion that took away any skiing for the rest of my life. I never went back to that ski resort, and I never saw the owner again. A few years ago, someone finally persuaded me to tell my story, and when it was done, he said that he was going skiing at that resort in a few days, and when we got back, we would talk about ghosts. When he returned, he said that more people experienced the same thing that we had faced that night. Occasionally, I go ghost hunting, but I will never go to the resort for personal reasons. I finally asked my sister a year ago what she really saw that night, and I thought the distance of time would lessen the impact of the event, but she's still haunted by it. She told me that something huge was sitting in the back seat of the car. She said it was huge, black shadow with red eyes. I'm left with the same question each time I think about that trip. Who were the children in the woods? I looked for an old murder report or something, but never found any. What exactly was killing them? And what was in the car with us that night? My sister felt we would have just disappeared if that thing had really wanted us to. Until I die, I will never forget those screams. Thanks, Biker, for letting me get this off my chest. Signed, Davey. Number 2. Dear Biker, I have a story that I really want to share with you. My mom and her family, which consisted of her parents and older sister, lived between the cities of Reidsville and Greensboro in North Carolina. One day they had an errand in Reedsville, and on their way there they saw an older couple walking on the opposite side of the road. A few hours later, leaving Reedsville on their way home, they saw the same couple in the same spot, heading in the same direction as before, almost as if they had been walking on a treadmill, having gained no ground at all. They pulled up and asked if they needed a lift, and they said they were trying to get to Greensboro, to the bus station. My grandpa agreed to take them there, but first, they would have to go home to be there in time to pick up their oldest daughter from the school bus near their house. Once inside the car, it became painfully obvious that they were poorly dressed for the chilly weather. The woman was wearing a summer dress and sandals, and the man a shirt and bib overalls, and shoes along with a brimmed hat. My mom, being a small child, sat between her parents in the front seat, but turned around facing the couple, staring at the strangers, like children do, just taking in their appearance. The one thing that stood out in her mind was the man's piercing, beautiful blue eyes. The man reached into his pocket and handed her a red pencil with Coca-Cola written on it. When they reached home, it was decided that they would have lunch with the couple, who said that they were the Bradleys, before the drive to Greensboro. Considering their clothing, my grandma decided to give them more appropriate winter clothing and coats and shoes for the woman who had only her sandals. Grandma also decided to pack them snacks and sandwiches for their trip. With their guests well fed and in warmer clothing, everyone piled into the car to take the trip to Greensboro. Halfway there on their trip, the Bradleys insisted that they needed to be let off on a bridge on old U.S. Highway 29. Grandpa protested, saying that they would likely not get another ride, and being winter, it would be getting dark soon, and insisted on carrying them all the way. But they were adamant. They said no, they must be left on that bridge. A sort of back and forth occurred between my grandfather and the Bradleys, with them asking to please be let off on that bridge. Unable to change their mind, he obliged and stopped the car. They opened the door and got out and immediately disappeared, leaving the door still open. My grandpa was horrified, leaping out of the car looking to see if they had fallen down on the ice out of his view. They were nowhere to be found. He looked all about and called for them, but got nothing back but silence. The whole area was clear as far as he could see, but still nothing. He got back in the car with his family, severely upset and confused as to what had just happened. Frantically, they drove up and down the road looking for them, wondering if they had somehow got away and gotten another ride, trying to rationalize the obvious spectacular disappearance of the nice couple known as the Bradleys. After a fruitless search, they drove back home confused as to what exactly had occurred. This made a huge impression on my mom, having distinctly remembered the incident all her life. So the question remains, who were the Bradleys? Were they ghosts? But ghosts don't usually stay all afternoon with you and eat lunch. Furthermore, when they disappeared, the clothes given to them disappeared as well. Even the sandwiches that were packed for them. This suggests that they were solid beings. Also, why did they insist on being let off on that bridge, saying that it must be done? Was it some sort of portal or gateway home? This whole thing remains a mystery. Signed, Cindy. And there you have it. 2 strange, unexplained experiences submitted from viewers. So, what did you think about these? As always, I'm anxious to read your thoughts and theories down in the comments section, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have an unexplained encounter or experience to share, just send it to the email address in the description and, well, your story might just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.